in a revolving door.
Hello everyone, I'm Gata the Catgirl here with a new video for you. You may be wondering why a Catgirl doesn't really have a girly voice, but that's because I was cursed by a wizard. When 47 Ronin was being advertised as a big Hollywood movie back in 2013, I got really excited. Japanese history is more than just an obsession for me. It actually became part of my identity when I practiced regularly in the art of kendo. It's a lifestyle, not just a cool exercise routine. Now, 47 Ronin is an absolute classic historical event in Japan. But to understand the story, you need to know a few things about Japan in the 1700s. There was a formal hierarchy. First and foremost was the emperor. Beneath him was the shogun, who was basically generals with political power. Under the shogun were the daimyo, who were military-class nobles over a body of land. Under the daimyo were the samurai, and they're pretty much like the Lord's knights.
No, on second thoughts, let's not go to Camelot. It is a silly place.
This was during what they called the Edo period, the most peaceful documented time in Japanese history. The last real war was 100 years earlier, so many of the modern warriors were losing what it meant to fight, and most of the nobles were getting complacent. Because of this, manners became a huge part of the emperor's court. You had to walk a certain way, wear the correct colors on the correct days, or you'd be laughed at for being improper. Now, the 47 Ronin is about a young daimyo.
Lord Asuno Naganori
Was a countryman, not like the emperor or his courtship back in Edo, which by today's standards is Tokyo. The daimyos had to spend mandatory months, a specific time period, within the shogun's courtship in order to keep their status as daimyo. But he didn't really fit in with the city politicians due to his mannerisms. He was a rough, rugged countryman who was far more similar to his fellow samurai warriors than a politician. The shogun wanted to have Asuno trained properly, so he got his master of ceremonies,
Kira Yoshinaka,
to help teach him proper manners. Kira expected some tribute from Asuno for his services, but Asuno simply assumed Kira did not require it due to simply following orders. Insulted by this lack of compensation, Kira began to be offensive towards Asuno and his training, constantly undermining him. He would basically act all pretentious and basically call him a hillbilly. Asuno got fed up with this constant abusive treatment. He drew his sword and struck Kira in the hallways of the Edo castle, cutting his face.
in your face.
This was absolutely unheard of. This sort of action could be compared to pulling out a gun in Buckingham Palace. You just don't do that. He was immediately apprehended and was then commanded to commit seppuku by the shogun as his punishment for attempted murder. This seppuku, as I'm sure a lot of people know, is a suicide method. Ritually, they would be dressed in a fancy white garb, knelt on the ground where they would be given a short sword, and they would have to slice open their abdomen. It was a very painful and slow death. They could bleed out for hours before dying. Formally, they chose what is known as a second. This second stands at the ready with their sword out as the ritual is performed in order to decapitate them to reduce the suffering. It is often someone that they trust because they want a clean, accurate cut to reduce the suffering. The whole ritual, if done properly, is very symbolic and kind of morbidly beautiful, if that makes any sense.
Don't judge me.
All 47 samurai of Lord Asuno were forced to be without masters and were dubbed Ronin, warriors for hire. While today it sounds kind of cool to be wandering masterless samurai, it was actually a huge disgrace. No one wanted to hire a failed samurai, and even then, their only trick in the trade was killing people. The entire purpose of the samurai was to kill, and vengeance was a normal practice for them. Once the 47 samurai found out Kira was reprieved of any fault of the incident, the Ronins decided that they would not let him get away with this. In their perspective, Kira committed murder to their beloved master and companion. Kira, now knowing full well that the remaining Ronin may be after him, had many spies sent to check up on them. They cleverly acted broken and lost, spending time in brothels and getting drunk for over 2 years to convince Kira sympathizers that they had absolutely no intentions of acting out. But instead, they strategically broke into Kira's home one night and hunted him down to force him to commit seppuku himself. He refused, so instead they just beheaded him and gave Kira's head to Asano's grave. When assigned to kill someone, the samurai would be paid by the head, so returning the head to their master was a symbol of their accomplishment in his name. They then gave themselves up immediately to the authorities. They themselves were sentenced to commit seppuku, and they did so without regret. The story is a beautiful example of honor. The men of Asano were ready to kill themselves in the name of their deceased master. They honored their roles as warriors and their master so much that they planned on restoring their master's honor and were ready to share the same fate while serving justice, despite their vows no longer actually being valid and despite their master's flaws. Such a beautiful story. I'm excited to see it on the big screen.
2 hours later.
What did I just watch? Was that the same story? Was that supposed to be the same story? What did I just watch? So the movie I just watched was about witchcraft, demons, and Keanu Reeves' love story. Keanu Reeves' character, despite being the main character, I guess, didn't seem to have a purpose in the story. It really should have been focused on Oishi, who was leading the 47 Ronin, but was not the main character because he wasn't white, I guess. The choreography was way too Hollywood and impractical for me. My kendo experience has ruined sword fight scenes for me, really. They just make me say, why would you do that? Repeatedly, and assume a child would be able to beat these supposed swordsmen doing pointless moves and leaving themselves completely open because it looks cool on the big screen. But I digress. They put a large role for demons for no necessary reason. Now there are demons everywhere, and Keanu Reeves is half demon to explain why he looks so different. It all makes sense now, really. All white people only look that way because they're half demons. That explains a lot, actually. Colonialism. The demons add nothing to the plot in any way, and it feels like they just wanted to spice up an already fascinating historical event with fantasy. I'm convinced that they only did it as an excuse to get a big white actor in their movie because they were afraid a decent movie wouldn't make money. So instead, a terrible one with a famous white guy might do better. They made the attack on Kita into a giant climactic full-scale battle when it was really a strategic silent infiltration with several years of planning where they willingly surrendered as soon as the job was done. I feel like it's insulting to history with how they portrayed it, as if everyone was just sitting around for a year and went,
Hey, let's kill that Kira Jack. Remember him?
Oh yeah, we should do that today.
Yeah, I think I can fit it in my schedule today.
Then Keanu Reeves jumps in and goes, Hey, can I go too? I'm a famous white dude who really doesn't do much for the setting or story, but I'm Keanu Reeves.
Sure, come along.
It seemed so spontaneous and unplanned, but it was well strategized to the point where they all separated. They pretended their lives were in shambles for years and became alcoholics and devoicing their wives just to convince Kira that they were no longer a threat. Wait, no, I meant divorcing. Did I really write devoicing? How do you devoice someone? Do you like pinch their lips together, or do you like make a Little Mermaid deal with the...
Just write the stupid script.
Whatever. They portrayed the Shogun as a fat old nasty man, making so many poor people kill themselves, when in fact he was simply following the law, and his actions were extremely generous and caring by granting them the death of seppuku. A warrior's death. It's the form of death where a warrior can happily die, knowing that no enemy has actually killed them in battle. Lord Asano was apparently under some kind of spell by Kira's witch. Yeah, she has a witch now. When he attacked Kira in the movie, so it totally wasn't his fault. This was to force the audience to take his side as the poor framed innocent man. But it sort of defeats the whole moral of the real story. His men died because they honored and loved him, no matter what he did. This portrayal has it because Kira was magical and forced Lord Asano to attack him in his sleep so he could execute him as a conspiracy. The magic in general felt very out of place, much like the whole demon nonsense, because white people are demons, I guess. Gata was supposed to have been a 60-year-old wise man by this point in his life. The movie portrayed him as a young and handsome, spoiled man. And Lord Asano was surprisingly young when he died in real life. He was in his early 30s. Not the wise old man trope they portrayed him as in the movie. But it looks like they wanted to make him older so they could give him a daughter old enough to be a pointless love interest for the white boy. Because that was important to the story.
It wasn't. It wasn't important to the story at all.
Now, we can ignore the inaccuracies and look at it as a movie. As a movie, it was very boring. It wasn't until the last 30 minutes or so until something finally happened. I'll admit the action was really cool, but the pacing makes it few and far between. It's the type of movie where no one will really be satisfied when they walk out of the theater. If you like Japan culture or history, you will hate it from the many inconsistencies. If you wanted to see action, you will hate it because of the lack of action. If you just like story, you will hate it from the terrible pacing and dialogue.
There is another way. You will find swords in a sea of trees. The Tengu Forest.
If you like romance, you will hate it because it's forced and unnecessary. It's just an all-around bad movie. It's like Pearl Harbor for Japan. You remember the Pearl Harbor movie that completely insulted the actual historical event with terrible characters, pointless romance, and a naive depiction of the Americans involved, right? This is the Japanese version of that. After watching 47 Ronin, I immediately looked for any other adaptation, like washing a bad taste out of my mouth. I bleached, I suppose. I found one made back in 1941 with corny acting, cheesy music, and over 200 minutes of black and white, poorly translated subtitles, so I had to try to use my Japanese for a lot of it. Mind you, I am certainly not fluent in Japanese, so it's a bit of a chore to have to put words together on my own. And bad quality by today's standards for movies. It never really got popular because it was released the week after Pearl Harbor happened. This older version was a million times more interesting to me. Now, I'm sure a lot of people liked this movie, and that's okay. It's not because I didn't like it, and I didn't. It's that the movie disgusted me beyond belief, and it's objectively insulting to the real men involved in the incident. Pass me some of that eye bleach. Okay, well, thank you for watching. And 47 Ronin really was not a great movie. Let me know how you felt about 47 Ronin in the comments, and we can discuss it. Maybe I'm just looking at it at the wrong perspective.
We'll find swords in the sea of trees. The Tengu Forest.